Oh, they remember. Trust me, they remember. That decision, that exact moment when you looked at everything you had, everything you were, everything they told you that you should be, and you said no. Not with words, not with drama, not with some grand announcement, but with action. Pure, undiluted, terrifying action. And they've been watching ever since. Watching, calculating, waiting for you to fail, waiting for you to crawl back, waiting for the universe to prove them right. But here's what's eating them alive right now. What's keeping them up at 3 a.m. scrolling through your life from behind fake accounts and borrowed phones? You didn't fail. You didn't break. You didn't come crawling back. That random decision they laughed at, that choice they called reckless, that move they said would destroy you, it didn't destroy you at all. It rebuilt you. And now they're silent. Not because they have nothing to say, but because everything they want to say would be an admission. An admission that they were wrong. An admission that they doubted you when you were right. An admission that the life they're living, the one they called safe and smart and responsible, is the real gamble. And you're the proof they can't erase. Let's rewind to that moment, shall we? That crossroads where you stood alone. Maybe it was a career change everyone called stupid. Maybe it was walking away from someone everyone said you'd never do better than. Maybe it was moving to a city with no plan, starting a business with no safety net, choosing a path with no guarantee. Whatever it was, you remember the room going quiet when you announced it, don't you? You remember the concerned faces, the passive-aggressive advice, the people who suddenly had opinions about your life when they'd been silent about their own failures for years. They told you to be realistic. They told you to think about the future. They told you that people like you don't just do things like that. People like you, as if they had the authority to define what people like you could become. As if their limitations were universal law. As if their fear was your inheritance. But you looked at their faces, at their careful lives, at their quiet desperation dressed up as stability, and something in you said no. Not rebellion for rebellion's sake. Not recklessness for the story. But clarity. Pure, unshakable clarity that their way wasn't your way. Their safe was your slow death. Their realistic was your prison. And so you jumped. Not knowing if there was a net. Not knowing if you'd fly or fall. But knowing, absolutely knowing that staying was the real danger. And oh, they watched. They watched with that mixture of concern and contempt. That blend of worry and secret hope that you'd crash so hard they could say they told you so. They watched your first steps, your stumbles, your moments of doubt that you posted about at 2 a.m. when the loneliness hit. They screenshot your struggles. They shared your setbacks in group chats with laughing emojis. They created entire narratives about your downfall before it even happened. Already writing the eulogy for your dreams while you were still building the foundation. Because that's what people do when you choose differently. They don't just disagree with your choice. They need you to fail. They need your alternative to be a cautionary tale, because if it's not, if you actually succeed, then what does that say about them? What does that say about the dreams they killed? What does that say about the voice they silenced? What does that say about the life they're living that they call practical, but feels like punishment? Your success wouldn't just be your victory. It would be their mirror. And they can't handle that kind of honesty. So, they watched, and they waited, and they whispered, and they projected their fears onto your journey like you were the screen and their insecurities were the movie. But here's what happened while they were watching. Here's what they didn't expect. Because they were too busy looking for your failure to see your evolution. You changed. Not just externally, not just in circumstances, but in frequency, in energy, in the very core of who you are. That decision, that leap, it didn't just change your situation. It changed your identity. You stopped being the person who needed permission. You stopped being the person who required validation. You stopped being the person who measured success by their standards. You became something they had no reference point for because you stepped outside the matrix of their understanding. And every day you survived, every small win you accumulated, every obstacle you overcame, it wasn't just progress, it was evidence. Evidence that their way wasn't the only way. Evidence that their fears weren't facts. Evidence that you could build a life they said was impossible. And that evidence, that living, breathing proof of an alternative reality, it terrified them more than your potential failure ever could. Because failure would have been comfortable. Failure would have confirmed their worldview. Failure would have let them sleep at night. But your success, your actual undeniable ascension, that keeps them awake, that makes them question everything, that turns their whole life into a question mark. 6 months passed, then a year, then 2. And the narrative they constructed started crumbling. The timelines they'd set for your collapse came and went. The disasters they'd predicted never materialized. Instead, they started seeing things they couldn't explain away. A new opportunity that found you. A connection that elevated you. A skill you developed in the darkness that now shined in the light. A confidence that didn't need their approval. A peace that didn't require their presence. A life that looked nothing like what they'd planned for you, but everything like what you'd envisioned for yourself. And slowly, quietly, their commentary shifted. The joke stopped. The concern disappeared. The advice dried up. Not because they suddenly supported you. Not because they were happy for you. But because they realized something that broke them just a little bit inside. You didn't need them. You never did. The only power they had was the power you gave them. And the moment you took it back, the moment you stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending your choices, stopped seeking their blessing, they became irrelevant. Not enemies. Not friends. Just irrelevant. Background noise in a life that had moved to a frequency they couldn't tune into anymore. Now, let's talk about what's happening right now, right this second as you're listening to these words. Because they're still watching. Make no mistake about that. They're still clicking on your stories. Still checking your updates. Still monitoring your moves from the shadows. But the energy is different now, isn't it? There's no more mockery. No more warnings. No more predictions of doom. Just silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Loaded silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than words ever could. Because what can they say now? What narrative can they spin that doesn't make them look like the fools they were? How do they explain away the fact that everything they said wouldn't work is working? How do they justify the concern that was really just control? How do they walk back years of doubt without admitting they were projecting their own limitations onto your potential? They can't. So, they watch in silence. They witness your rise with their mouths closed. They see your victories and swallow their words. And every single day that you continue to thrive, every milestone you reach, every level you unlock, it's another nail in the coffin of the story they tried to write about you. You're not just succeeding. You're rewriting the rules. You're proving that their way isn't the way. You're living evidence that the system they bought into isn't the only system. And that makes you dangerous. Because let's be clear about what you've actually done here. You didn't just make a decision. You declared independence. You didn't just choose a different path. You rejected their authority over your life. You didn't just survive their doubt. You transformed it into fuel. Every person who said you couldn't, you used their words as weights in your training. Every obstacle they said would stop you, you turned into a stepping stone. Every moment they expected you to quit, you dug deeper. Not to prove them wrong, that's the beautiful part. Not to show them anything, but to prove to yourself that their voices were lies. That their fears were fiction. That their version of reality was just one version. And you could author your own. And now here you stand. Not at the end of the journey because the real ones never end, but at a vantage point they never thought you'd reach. Looking down at where you started. Looking around at where you are. Looking forward at where you're going. And they're down there somewhere. Still watching. Still silent. Still struggling to reconcile the you they predicted with the you that exists. And that dissonance, that gap between their prophecy and your reality, it's destroying them in ways you'll never see. In ways they'll never admit. In quiet moments of reflection when they look at their own lives and wonder what would have happened if they'd been brave enough to make their own random decision. If they'd been strong enough to ignore the voices. If they'd been crazy enough to believe in themselves the way you believed in yourself. Let me tell you what they see when they look at you now. They see someone who's not asking for permission anymore. They see someone who's not waiting for approval. They see someone who's not living by their timeline or their definitions or their limitations. They see autonomy. They see freedom. They see authenticity. And all of those things, every single one of them, they're mirrors reflecting back what they don't have. What they traded for safety. What they sacrificed for acceptance. What they killed for comfort. Your life isn't just your life anymore. It's a question mark hovering over theirs. It's a constant reminder of the road not taken. It's a living, breathing, thriving alternative universe where courage won and fear lost. And they have to live with that. They have to wake up every day knowing that someone they doubted is living the life they were too afraid to build. Someone they laughed at is experiencing the freedom they were too controlled to chase. Someone they wrote off is writing a story they never had the guts to start. That's not your burden to carry. That's not your responsibility to fix. That's just the natural consequence of choosing yourself when everyone else was choosing fear. That's just what happens when you stop living for their comfort and start living for your calling. That's just the price they pay for being spectators in a game where you became a player. And here's the part they really can't stand. Here's the thing that keeps them refreshing your page at midnight. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're not spending your energy proving anything to them. You're just living powerfully, purposefully, unapologetically living. You're not in their mentions explaining yourself. You're not writing long posts about your journey. You're not fighting for their validation. You're just doing the work, building the life, becoming the person. And that indifference, that genuine lack of concern for their opinion, it's more devastating than any comeback could be. Because when you argued with them, when you defended yourself, when you cared about their perspective, you gave them relevance. You gave them a role in your story. You made them important. But now they're just audience members watching a show they can't influence. They can watch. They can have opinions. They can whisper in the dark, but they can't touch you. They can't change you. They can't stop you. And that powerlessness, that complete and total irrelevance, it's the ultimate defeat. Not because you destroyed them, but because you outgrew them. Not because you proved them wrong, but because you proved their opinion doesn't matter. Not because you're better than them, but because you're free and they're still trapped in the prison of other people's expectations, still living by rules they never questioned, still choosing safety over soul. Now, I need you to understand something critical. Something that will separate you from the people who make one bold decision and then spend the rest of their lives looking back. That decision you made, that moment of courage, it wasn't the destination, it was the door. It was the first step in a lifetime of steps. It was the beginning of a pattern, not a singular event. Because the people who truly transform, the ones who don't just survive their bold choice, but thrive because of it, they understand that courage is a muscle. Every time you use it, it gets stronger. Every time you choose yourself over their comfort, you expand your capacity. Every time you move forward despite their silence, despite their judgment, despite their secret hope that you'll fail, you're training yourself for the next level. And there's always a next level. There's always a bigger decision. There's always a deeper leap. There's always another moment where the crowd will doubt and you'll have to decide if you're going to shrink back to their size or expand into your potential. And if you're listening to these words right now, if you're feeling that resonance in your chest, that knowing in your bones, then you already know the answer. You've tasted freedom. You've felt what it's like to choose yourself. You've experienced the power of trusting your vision over their fear. And once you taste that, once you feel that, there's no going back. There's only forward, only higher, only deeper into the life you were meant to live. So, what happens next? What happens now that you've made it past the point where they expected you to fail? Now that their silence has become your soundtrack, now that their doubt has become your fuel, now that their watching has become irrelevant. Simple. You keep building. You keep growing. You keep evolving. But not for them. Not to prove anything. Not to make them regret their doubt or admit their mistake. For you. For the vision only you can see. For the potential only you can feel. For the life only you can live. Because here's the secret they don't want you to know. Here's the truth that terrifies them most. Your story isn't about them at all. It never was. They were just extras in a movie where you're the main character. They were just background noise in a symphony where you're the soloist. They were just spectators in an arena where you're the champion. And the moment you truly internalize that, the moment you stop making them relevant to your narrative, that's when you become unstoppable. That's when you transcend their understanding. That's when you move into a realm where their opinion is just weather, changing and irrelevant, while you're the mountain, solid and unmoved. And mountains don't explain themselves to clouds. Mountains don't justify their height to valleys. Mountains just stand, powerful, present, permanent. While everything else shifts and changes and eventually fades away. Let's talk about the ripple effects for a moment. Because that decision you made, it didn't just change your trajectory. It changed the trajectory of everyone watching. Some of them, the ones with courage hiding under their fear, they saw you jump and something inside them woke up. Something that had been sleeping under years of should and supposed to and better not. You became their permission slip, their proof of concept, their evidence that the jump is survivable. And somewhere out there, someone you'll never meet made their own random decision because you made yours. Someone walked away from their own toxic situation because you walked away from yours. Someone chose their own dreams over someone else's expectations because you showed them it could be done. That's legacy. That's impact. That's the real measure of success. Not the money you make or the status you achieve or the things you accumulate, but the permission you give others just by living your truth. Just by being brave. Just by choosing yourself when the world was choosing you to stay small. And the beautiful irony is that the people who doubted you, who watched you in silence, who secretly hoped you'd fail, they have to live in a world where your decision created a ripple, where your courage inspired others, where your success made their doubt look foolish, not just to you, but to everyone else who was watching them watch you. They're not just wrong, they're exposed. Their fear isn't just personal anymore. It's public. It's on display. It's a case study in what happens when you let other people's dreams die because you're too afraid to live your own. But let's get darker for a second. Let's go to the place most won't. Because some of those silent watchers, they're not just uncomfortable. They're not just embarrassed. They're broken. Legitimately broken by your success. Their entire identity was built on being the smart one, the practical one, the one who knew better, the one who made the right choices. And you came along and shattered that identity with your results. You proved that their right was actually wrong. That their smart was actually scared. That their better was actually bitter. And when someone's entire sense of self is built on a lie, when their whole life is organized around a false belief, and then reality comes along and exposes that belief as fiction, it doesn't just hurt them. It destroys them. They have to reconstruct everything. They have to question every choice they made. They have to look at their partner, their job, their city, their life, and ask if they're there because they wanted to be or because they were too afraid to want anything else. And that kind of existential crisis, that level of self-examination, most people can't handle it. So, they don't. They just stay silent. They just keep watching. They just live with the quiet knowledge that they were wrong and you were right, and there's nothing they can do about it now, except watch you become more right every single day. That's not your responsibility to fix. That's not your burden to carry. That's just the natural consequence of their choices meeting your choices in the arena of reality. You chose courage, they chose comfort. You chose growth, they chose safety. You chose yourself, they chose approval. And now, everyone gets to see what each choice produces. Here's what they'll never tell you directly, but what you need to hear. They're proud of you. Somewhere under the silence, under the discomfort, under the ego that won't let them admit they were wrong, there's a part of them that's genuinely proud. That looks at what you've built and feels a warmth they can't explain. That sees your success and experiences joy they immediately suppress because it doesn't fit the narrative they've been telling themselves. That watches you thrive and thinks, just for a moment before the fear rushes back in, maybe I could do that, too. But they'll never say it. They'll never acknowledge it. They'll never give you that recognition. Because giving you that would mean admitting too much. It would mean confessing their doubt. It would mean revealing their fear. It would mean showing their hand. So, they stay silent. And in that silence, you have to find your own validation. You have to become your own cheerleader. You have to look at your journey, at your growth, at your transformation, and say, I'm proud of me. I'm amazed by me.